Okay, so the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund is an international fund that's been set up to support conservation interventions in the global biodiversity hotspots. So it's quite a unique partnership. There's 7 different organizations that are involved in providing this fund, setting up the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. Apologies to those that are intimately involved in this already and are very aware of this. But it's good to create the context, and those that have been involved in the CAPE program and SCEP would also sort of have a good relevance to this. But the 7 organizations that provide the funding are the Government of Japan, a French development agency, I'm not going to pronounce that, the World Bank, the Global Environment Facility, the MacArthur Foundation, Conservation International, and the European Union. Now, Conservation International in the States actually provide the secretariat for the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. And the whole aim of this is to provide strategic funding and assistance to civil society, non-government and private sector organizations to help conserve the biodiversity within identified biodiversity hotspots. Now, there's a number of hotspots that Conservation International have actually identified through various filters. And this map indicates those red areas where the CEPF program is currently active in funding hotspots, and the blue areas are those that are still to be funded. And the whole idea of CEPF is to ultimately fund conservation interventions in all, I think there's 36 biodiversity hotspots throughout the world. And those hotspots are pretty much areas that have very high endemicity, but also very high levels of transformation. So in that sense, it's really important biodiversity, but areas that are significantly under threat. So this is, where we are at the moment, or with CEPF, just to give you that global context, it was founded in 2000. The first grants were awarded in 2001. There's 23 of the 36 biodiversity hotspots that are currently or have been funded in various ways, which involves 89 countries, close to 2,000 civil society partner organizations that have been supported through this funding mechanism. About $175 million has been invested by those 7 broader partner organizations in CEPF, and it's resulted in close on 13 million hectares of new protected areas in some form or other. And that's very relevant to the discussions we're having today around the biodiversity stewardship mechanism. A lot of these hectares under protection, under new protected areas or better biodiversity management have resulted through various mechanisms in various countries around the world. And specifically in South Africa, it has a very strong relevance in terms of the biodiversity stewardship program. So the CEPF funded hotspot in this context is the Maputo Ponderland Albany hotspot. It extends from sort of southern Mozambique all the way through KwaZulu-Natal into the Eastern Cape down to PE. And in effect, it's a massive hotspot that CEPF are funding. And the whole idea is to strengthen the involvement and effectiveness of civil society in conservation and management of the biodiversity within that hotspot. I'm just briefly going to go through the 5 strategic directions that we identified in terms of leveraging the investment. Obviously, the investment is not to solve all biodiversity conservation issues across the hotspot. You can see from the area it's vast. It's to pick out specific relevant elements that can make a catalytic difference to conservation efforts in the area. So the first was around strengthening protection and management of under-capacitated and emerging protected areas, and those were specifically in southern Mozambique and then in some of them around the Wild Coast in the Eastern Cape. The second one, which has probably been the biggest investment in this hotspot, was expand conservation areas and improve land use in 19 key biodiversity areas. I'll show you the map of those biodiversity areas. So this was around the main elements of this was around biodiversity stewardship, using this as a mechanism to secure new areas under protection and improved land use management, and that's very important. The third was really around ecosystem services and ecosystem functioning and integrity in two of the larger corridors that were identified, specifically the highland grassland and the ponderland corridor, and you'll see the map now. The fourth element was to create an enabling environment, to have a network of organizations interacting, learning from each other, and that's what we're doing now. This is part of this session around lessons learned, sharing experiences, listening to presentations on the biodiversity stewardship mechanisms, what works, what doesn't work, what is needed for success. This is part of this learning network that ourselves, together with SANBI, have developed to enable this sharing of information between organizations. And the fifth is really the role that Wildlands Conservation Trust plays as the regional implementation team, being the local organization implementing this on behalf of CEPF, which sits in the US. So that just gives you an idea of the type of investment, or where the catalytic investment was identified. This map very briefly just shows all the 22 key biodiversity areas. The detail is not important, but it's kind of spread across the area, and it indicates the two priority corridors. The colours aren't very good there, eh? Mainly the highland grassland corridor and the ponderland corridor. Sorry, those colours are really shocking. We'll move on. So just to give you a very quick summary, we're in the fourth year of the 5-year investment, and so that's why a lot of the presentations today are going to be from organizations that have been funded through this mechanism and have gone quite well along the line in terms of their projects. So at the moment there's been $5.9 million granted so far to organizations. Additional $5.6 million has been leveraged by those organizations. 37 large grants of greater than $20,000, 50 small grants of less than $20,000, 300,000 hectares looking at new protected areas, 1.3 million hectares improved land use management in various forms, and we're going to hear a lot about that in these sessions. 68 groups supported, organizations, and 62 communities that are being supported through this process. So you can see the value add that's actually taken place through this investment. Now, the link from the CEPF program to biodiversity stewardship is pretty much at the beginning of the investment through Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. An ecosystem profile was developed in 2010. The key intervention that was identified there was biodiversity stewardship, the mechanism to try and engage and develop new protected areas. And currently, 21 of the 37 large grant projects either have a very dedicated focus on biodiversity stewardship or an element of their work focusing on biodiversity stewardship. And then 14 of the 50 small grants are looking at projects that are supporting biodiversity stewardship in some way. A lot of those small grants are, because it's $20,000 and less, they're very specific and focused, so they don't have the ability to carry out the entire biodiversity stewardship process. But you can see that there's a real focus on using biodiversity stewardship as a mechanism within this catalytic investment.